All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you again for joining. I am Adriana Parchment, the Azure specialist with MC3, and this morning we just want to go through some things that we think everyone should know by now. So, our topic today starts with backup and disaster recovery, and we've heard about it. We've seen it, we've heard what it can do for us, but let's just take a look into backup and disaster recovery from a standpoint of how is it possible to use in Azure and what are the benefits? How can we identify the opportunities to create an Azure backup or disaster recovery solution for our customers and how we can maximize that value for them? So we've just exited the hurricane season and
Sorry, Adriana, I'm not sure if you're sharing your screen as yet, but we're not seeing anything.
oh, just a second. There we go. Are we seeing the screen?
Yeah, now we're seeing the screen.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
now we're
Thanks,
seeing it.
Kayla.
Thank you. No problem.
So we just exited the hurricane season, and many of us have not experienced the wrath of a hurricane this season, and that's good. But do we do we know that at this point we're still not necessarily out of the woods yet with being having a backup and disaster recovery strategy in place, though we know that one of the reasons can be natural disasters in our area. We have so many different types of really impetus for needing a backup and disaster recovery strategy, and we will cover those today. So we'll be looking at a brief introduction to Azure and its core benefits, as well as a bit of technical benefits, and then we'll see how these things are going to translate to how business continuity in Azure will be beneficial to our customers and how we can show them that value. Now, Azure, as we know, is Microsoft's cloud solution platform. It has a list of ever expanding services that we can use to tailor to any particular business goal or to create solutions for each business that we might be servicing. So Azure supports full infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service offerings. And these can include resources like virtual machines for infrastructure as a service running in the cloud. We have website and database hosting for platform as a service. And we also have things like our SaaS that are or security implementations in Azure that are just services that we have out of the box to run in our environments. Now, when we compare the on-premises and the cloud models, we take a look at the demarcation point of really what the customer is responsible for versus what the vendor is responsible for. And when we're on premises, we know that we're responsible for everything from the underlying hardware and the fabric that's running on top of that, as well as the applications and how we have our data and access interacting with that. When you move over into the cloud space, you take a look at the shift in what is actually managed by the vendor versus what the customer is now responsible for. In an infrastructure as a service model, you are not responsible for the infrastructure. So the service is the infrastructure. You are not responsible for the storage, for the networking, and for the compute resources that are running on top of the hardware. So you have that service provided for you, and then you are responsible for everything that is run on top of that. You go over to a platform as a service deployments, and you realize that you now have the compute, networking, and storage, the physical layer, as well as the platform that you are running the applications on, are then managed by the cloud provider. You are now only representing the applications and the data and how that data is accessed. when you move over to a software as a service management, you realize that you're no longer responsible for anything except the data and the access. So you get a provisioned package software that you are able to just go in and modify your whatever data and who and what has access to this. We now delve into the core benefits now. With cloud technical and financial benefits, we realize that technical benefits include the scalability. With scalability, you have this inherent elasticity and on-demand products. So now you no longer need to provision products for capacity in ahead of time. So now you're not buying servers with 64 gigs of RAM when you need, on majority of the year, your processing is only going to go up to 32 and you need to now institute for a peak. With the cloud, you have that scalability to be able to provision what you need and what you need for when you need it. And when you don't need those resources, you're able to easily scale back down, scale back in. You have high availability because of one, this inherent scalability, as well as the vast areas that Microsoft will have data centers and their availability of their resources. So now you have redundancy that ensures that your applications, your data is always available whenever you need it. You have security and compliance, as Microsoft is the most compliant cloud. And you have now capacity optimization, as we mentioned with the scalability before, and you have now the opportunity to use only what you need and pay for only what you need when you're using that capacity. The financial benefits are great, and it all depends on how well you are managing and creating your resources. So you have the first benefit is the operational expenditure pricing model, where instead of, for example, small businesses now needing to procure powerful servers that upfront that they'll have to pay for right then and there, you're able to utilize your machines in the cloud, spin them up on demand, and use them based on the capacity that you need at the time. So you're paying a monthly fee for the usage of your resources. You have then a reduced data center footprint because when you now have less machines running on premises, you don't have to worry about the space, the electricity cost, the impact on the environment. You are now worrying about how do I get my systems and processes more streamlined for my business and more innovation can take place. So that leads into your staff productivity as well and the sustainability of your business going forward. And as we mentioned before, the CapEx versus the OpEx model reduces the need for businesses to now be managing the on-premises headaches, such as the facility costs, insurances, over provisioning and low capacity optimization, configurations, errors, and having in place security and management for your infrastructure on premises. You have a lot less of that headache and you can now shift over to a more on-demand kind of way of managing, of procuring or getting your services up and running. You have more automation that you are able to leverage now in the cloud, and you now have less management overhead in the sense of your physical infrastructure getting that managed, as well as the software and so on top of this. Now that we've had a small look onto the benefits, how do we translate all of these benefits into something that's going to provide some kind of value for your customer? So with business continuity, we realize that in IT, and in life, how these things translate into our business, it is something that you will realize it fails. There are internal and external factors in our IT infrastructure that will cause at some point or another that our infrastructure will fail, our data will be lost. There will be some malicious actor that might try to get into your systems. There are software updates. There are so many things that we have to be worrying about in our infrastructure that can at any point break our system. And this is why we need to be aware of the fact that, yes, it's not a matter of if the system will break or if something will happen, but when. And when you are there, you need to be able to prepare for those situations and immediately or quickly be able to mitigate them. So in this sense, you can look at your backup and disaster recovery as insurance. So we pay a premium every month for our health insurance or critical insurance or life insurance. And sometimes you're there and you're like, why am I really paying this money? But then something happens. You're in an accident today and you need to have emergency surgery. You realize that when you step into the hospital, your critical illness or your health insurance is going to cover a lot of that. So persons will be understanding that, yes, this is something that is a cost to me, but in the long run, should something happen, you know that you are not in deficit and you are prepared to bounce back at any eventuality. So business continuity and disaster recovery is a plan for the unexpected. In the event of a disaster, catastrophic or small, you should be able to expect the unexpected in a sense. So the unexpected is not here in the sense that I don't know what will happen. We do have an idea of what will happen. The unexpected is when it will happen. So we know that something can happen. We can put things in place that whenever something breaks in our environment, we're able to bounce back. We're able to reduce the downtime for the organization and quickly return to the full operating state in order to then mitigate some things like losing customer data. Nobody wants to lose customer data. You don't want to lose your company's data as well. You can reduce the financial loss for trying to recover your systems and data in a reactive setting. And then you can also prevent business reputation from being tarnished. If you're losing data, if service is always down and customers cannot get to the infrastructure to, for example, for payments, say, for example, a client is running their payment system online, and if something goes down or it's constantly going down, that can put a damper on the reputation, and not only on the reputation, but data now is something that's very important, and losing customer data can result in breaches for the data protection laws. You don't need you and persons can actually you can actually have legal suits in terms of managing customer data. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Now, how does Azure backup and disaster recovery then help businesses with all of these issues that we have before mentioned? And with these things are similar. Now, persons tend to mix the two. They can be used together, but at the end of the day, there are two separate solutions aim at a common goal, but not the same goal. The common goal is ensuring that data and systems are available. How they go about it are two totally different scenarios. Now, with disaster recovery, when your applications have catastrophic failure, your data center burns down with 10 servers in there, or your there's an earthquake and the data center gets swallowed up, or there's a flood, a hurricane, and this is something that now damages or causes a lot of damage to your infrastructure, to your data center, to a location. You have a very low retention period, and you have a very low time as well to get your systems back up and running. So in disaster recovery, in these events is where you take a look at disaster recovery. For backups, you can still have something, for example, your machine goes down, a server goes down, it goes dead, one server and maybe 10. You can still do backups for this, but you probably have a higher retention point and a higher time to get back online. If you have lost data or corrupted data, you're able to have restoration of this data. So backups tend to focus more so on data as well as scenarios with a lower recovery time objective, or sorry, a higher recovery time objective and a greater recovery point objective. Now with Azure Backup, there are some things that we want to take in consideration first. And one of those is the simplicity. Now, we spoke about the model of the cloud model before and the responsibility model, and how the responsibility is shared. With the cloud model of Azure Backup, realize that there's a lot less infrastructure overhead for the backup solutions. You have a more cost-effective method of implementing your solutions because of the simplicity here, because of the fact that you're no longer procuring the storage equipment, the servers for backup, getting tapes or getting external hardware to do your backups. You have to now get an off-site storage area. And for SMBs especially, this might be out of the reach or out of the scope or out of the budget at the point in time. So it provides the simple way to get an additional backup or get the primary backup up and running, and to have an off-site backup, so you know that at any point your data and infrastructure it's safe and it's available to you. You have a diverse workload support, so you can protect whether servers, applications, data, whether it's on premises, in Azure, or in another cloud. And we'll talk about that soon. You can manage at scale. So there's a dashboard, the Azure Backup Center, where you are able to see all of your backups, your backup jobs, the monitoring, the security, everything related to your backup across your environments in real time. So you're able to see all of this, manage your backups, have a more cost-effective way of backing up everything, and have now a secure backup, because now with the backups on Azure Backup, you have many different security controls and tools in place that can be used, and we'll take a look at that in a few. So the scope of things that you can back up with Azure Backup: you can protect your cloud workloads. You can protect workloads that are running in Azure. So cloud workloads are workloads that are in, say, for example, AWS or GCP. You can protect your Azure native workloads, and you can protect Azure Stack workloads as well as on-premises workloads and data. So you can back up from on-premises. And with our on-premises backup, you'll see that you're able to do file and folder level backups, application level backups, and infrastructure level backups. And the support is there for physical servers, for Hyper-V VMs, as well as VMware VMs on the on-premises. And here you have the Azure virtual machines in Azure. When we look at data resilience and security, the resiliency of the cloud, as we mentioned before, it has a massive global scale, and there are data centers that are available all over the world. You have pairings for regions. So you have local redundant storage, you have geo-redundant storage, and you have zone redundant storage. With each of these different tiers, you get a different level of resiliency. So with local redundant storage, you know that you have it's one data center that you have 3 different copies of your data. So if a rack goes down, your data is still available. You might want to go up more to a zone redundant storage scenario where you're no longer in one data center. So heaven forbid something happens to one data center. You are now spread out across different zones, and different zones are basically replica data centers within a particular region that you can say, all right, now I have a copy of my data in one data center, but for extra protection, I want to put it in another data center that is spread out and a bit farther away from the original data center. So something happens in one zone, you are still protected by another zone. And if we come to the realization that, you know, maybe a zone is not good enough for me, you're able to now do geo-redundant storage. And this is where you have geographies. So different geographies. You have the data is now placed into different regions. So East US or West US, you want to put your data in one data center in the West US, you can put it over in East US. They're separated by a large distance, and now if there is something that's really going on that is going to span different regions, we're probably having a really bad day, and maybe backups are the least of our issues. But you can now see that you have the different options to ensure that you have resiliency for backups and that your data can always be available in times of when it's needed for access, for backing up, and just to have that data protected. There is built-in security. So you have role-based access control built into Azure. You have encryption for your data at rest, so while it's in the storage account, or in transit, so while it's being it's being transferred to the vaults, it's being transferred from on-premises to Azure. You have that encryption that protects your data, so it's not easily intercepted. You're not having that issue of, is my data secure while it's moving? You have soft deletes, and this is a protection against malicious or accidental deletion of your data. Then you have multiple user authentication, and you also have customer managed keys for the encryption. The multiple user authentication is for scenarios where you need authentication to be able to perform certain actions on the data that is being stored for your backups or for your disaster recovery. So not anyone is able to just go in and stop backup jobs or delete data without proper authorization. You then have the management of your backups, so you're easily able to manage your backups at scale. You have integration with Azure Backup, with Azure Backup and Azure Policy, with Azure Monitor and Lighthouse, so that you're able to know, with Lighthouse, you can manage from different subscriptions and from different tenants. You have Azure Monitor for being able to monitor and track your backups, have alerting and so on for your backup, so you always know the status of what's going on with it. You have Azure Policies that can now define the resources, the resources, basically what the governing policy of an organization may be, so that all of your backups may be done in the same order. So you have policies that are built into the Azure Backup Fabric, so that you are able to set your scheduling, set the retention periods, and so on for the backup. We take a dive now into Azure Site Recovery. And what this is, it's a disaster recovery as a service. Now with Microsoft and with the cloud, everything is as a service. With disaster recovery as a service, you are able to benefit from the reduced complexity of setting up a disaster recovery site. Now we know for disaster recovery sites, you will have an external or secondary site that you have mirroring infrastructure that is on the primary site, and then you're going to be copying over data, whether it's in real time or you're copying in one place, and then you're able to set up in the secondary location. Instead of having all of that and getting infrastructure in place, buying two sets of equipment, getting someone over there to manage that, and footing the cost of the electricity, the space for the disaster recovery site. What Azure does is gives you the ability to do your replication of whether it is your Azure environments or workloads on your on-premises environment, and enable you to, in real time, copy that data to Azure and be able to then spin up your disaster recovery site in the event that you need to fail over to your secondary site. You're able to leverage the pay-as-you-go model for the secondary site. So with the pay-as-you-go model, as we mentioned before, you're paying for what you're using at the particular point that you're using it. With the infrastructure and the compute resources that are put into your secondary site, they are not paid for until you fail over. So you will realize that you're paying mostly for just the data storage and additional resources that you may have in your environment at the point in time, but the compute resources, the 10 million servers that you want to put up, that you want to fail over to, those compute costs, licensing costs, and all of those costs associated with those are not charged for until you have failover. And when you fail back to your environments, those costs and charges are then turned off because you're not using the service. You're replicating VMs, applications, so bare metal and Windows instances in AWS. What this means is now on-premises, virtual machines, bare metal physical machines can be replicated. The applications running on those can be replicated as well. And Windows virtual machine instances in AWS can be replicated to Azure. The caveat with this particular thing, though, is that with the AWS instances, you cannot fail back to AWS. So you have to know what exactly you will be doing to get back to AWS, but it's not a case where you can fail over and fail back like in Azure or on premises. And as well as with bare metal servers, you're not able to fail back to bare metal servers on premises. You have to fail back to VMware because naturally, when you fail over, it's going to become a virtual machine and it's not going to be able to go back on premises as a physical machine. So with Azure Site Recovery, you're going to use this when you need high data retention and a very low recovery time objective. Another great benefit of the Azure Site Recovery is that you can test your failovers. So if you need to fail over, you need to be testing your site recovery infrastructure. You can do this without interrupting your daily activities. So just a look at the infrastructure and the resources that you can actually replicate with Azure Site Recovery. You can do Windows virtual machines in AWS. You can replicate Azure workloads, and you can also replicate Azure Stack and on-premises VMs and bare metal servers. So just to drive it home, you are able to replicate workloads and apps from a primary network to Azure. So a primary infra for your primary site to Azure. You replicate VMs in Azure to and in other clouds and on premises. So bare metal Windows machines, you can do Hyper-V or VMware VMs, and this can be either Linux or Windows. You can replicate Windows VMs from AWS to Azure, and you can replicate Windows or Linux VMs or bare metal machines, well, VMs from Azure Stack. So in a nutshell and in a visual, this is what it would look like. So with the different demarcation points, you can have either on-premise in Azure Stack Hub. You can replicate the following servers. So you can replicate applications that are running on servers as the following. So Exchange, SharePoint, SQL. You can replicate file level. So file servers, domain controllers, all of these can be backed up. And this is done with the Azure Backup Server. This is where all of the replication is done, and it is then sent to a recovery services vault. You can do the Azure import and export for organizations that have a very high amount of data. I think it's a few terabytes of data and above that you will only be able to actually send it to Azure using the data box, which is the Azure import and export. It's sent to the Azure storage and then it's sent to the recovery vault. But if it's within a specific size, you can send it directly to this recovery services vault from the MAB server. With an Azure scenario, you are able to replicate your workloads and to the Azure Recovery Services Vault, and it then sends it over to a secondary location or secondary region. From there, in an Azure Site Recovery scenario, you have your network set up, and within your network, you have your various workloads running. What the Azure the Azure Site Recovery does is replicate all of these and disks, put them into a storage account, and replicate the disks. When the disks are replicated, these VMs are basically formed through an assessment done in Azure of what the requirements are, what the specs of the applications or virtual machines are, and it will recreate these. These are not paid for, or these are not billed until you have failed over and the VMs or the resources begin to run. So we've done a great bit of talking, and we want to just bring it back over to you and to see if there has been an understanding of how these scenarios would work. So I'm going to set up a few pictures on the screen. You can drop the answers in the chat, but I will give a small scenario around the pictures, and then you tell if it is a backup scenario or a disaster recovery scenario. So let's get ready to type. Is everyone here able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Okay, great.
Um,
All right. This is a street in downtown Montego Bay in St. James. It was just a rainy evening. It was not actually a hurricane. And the rain caused extreme flooding in the town. This is one of the town's central hubs. And on this very street, there was a banking institution. Now, they were flooded, and all of their computers on the ground floor had been flooded out. So, this is where the tellers are. Their computers there had been flooded out, and the data that they had on those machines were lost. If we were supposed to go in and try to amend this situation, what would be your recommendation? So you can type in the chat if you'd go with an Azure backup or disaster recovery. I see Normie says disaster recovery. You can keep it coming. Anyone else?
Yes, Darren had said disaster recovery. Glenn said disaster recovery. Hugh says this. So everyone is saying
Everyone can.
disaster. Yeah.
And yes, I can agree. And we go with a disaster recovery scenario because one, it's a bank. With a bank, um, you have critical information there. You have a lot of customer data. You have a lot of banking information, financial data. So you need your data to be and your infrastructure and to be up and running in a short amount of time. You need to move. You probably need to be able to access them. Right, exactly. Hugh knows exactly what we're talking about. Yes, the bank was closed and you had to divert your clients to different locations. So you need to be able to access this data from another location. And, a disaster recovery scenario would be best to get this kind of institution back on the market as soon as possible. So the same street, a few blocks down, this supermarket was flooded. All of its inventory was gone. It had two computers that hosted payroll and inventory data. And it also had two computers for the workstation or the cashiers. The payroll system needed to be back online in about 2 weeks. And they needed to get the situation back up and running. What would you suggest for this scenario? Let's not all type at once. All right, DR and DR. Any more answers? Can also be disaster recovery, yes. So this one can go either way. It can be a disaster recovery scenario, or it can be a backup scenario that just, replicates. You are able to replicate and get your information back. Because in this sense, the time that was given was about 2 weeks to get the information back up and running. It's a supermarket. It's a small supermarket, and so you don't necessarily you wouldn't always need a disaster recovery strategy in the sense that they're all flooded out. They wouldn't need to necessarily get back up and running tomorrow. So it's not needed at a short period of time, and they can then just get new equipment, or they can put their backups in the cloud and access them just like that. But for this scenario, I would say a backup because of the recovery time that was given for this particular scenario. All right. So Premier Plaza and Halfway Tree, just in about July, was spontaneously combusted into flames. Say, for example, your client now has a clothing store in this complex and it is ablaze. They had one machine in their store that hosted their database and the application for their online store. What would you suggest in a scenario like this to get their business back up and running? All right. I see in the chat backup, backup, backup. Yes, we'll go with a backup because one, there's always an important thing to note that whenever we're going in for these situations, always remember to find out what the recovery time objective would be. How long do they need to be back up for an online store? How much money are they losing? So what is their losses that they're incurring and how much data can they afford to lose? So because there was nothing specified in this one, we'll go with a backup scenario. It wasn't urgent and you are able to get your data back up and run. You're able to retrieve your data from, an offsite backup or a cloud backup, and you're able to then reprovision your databases and so on to be able to get your system back up and running. And the last one, there was a hurricane and there was immense flooding in a particular area. Now, in this area, there was, say, for example, a hospital, and this hospital lost an entire server room with critical information, patient information, um, machines that would run certain processes in the hospital. They have a very short time to get back up. They need to be up like today. What would you recommend in a situation like this to keep running with very little loss of their data as well as in the time that disaster is going on? I see Hugh with disaster recovery. Yes. Anyone else want to take us? We got this. Backup and DR. Yes. All right. So yes, a DR situation would be a DR solution would be the best for that particular situation. There's a very low recovery time objective. There is very critical data on patients' health. We can't afford for that to be lost, or we can't afford for that to be lost, as well as in an emergency, especially one like this, there are certain infrastructure and places that need to be up and running at the drop of a hat. So disaster recovery would get your business or your organization up and running in the shortest possible time with as little data lost as anticipated or needed. So we're going to take a look now at the backup and site recovery pricing. Now we know that it's based off consumption and not everything is going to be set in stone, but there are certain benchmarks that we can take a look at to just kind of understand what we'll be going into and how we can be able to manage certain costs. Now with Azure Backup, you are charged for in two folds. So it's a protected instance charge and then for the actual storage of the data that's being stored. So the protected instances are the servers on premises, the virtual machines, databases, the file shares, and the storage accounts in Azure. So the price per protected instance, you can see here, per VMs, it is $10 per protected instance per month. You then have, depending on the type of database, you have SQL and you have SAP HANA VMs, you pay $25 or $80 per protected instance. For Azure files in Azure, if you want to replicate Azure files, then it's $5. And with blobs and disks, it's free. So separate from that, you have the cost of the backup storage. So this is the amount of data that's actually being stored. So you have prices that will vary based on the type of redundancy that is selected, and you will realize it goes up as the redundancy gets better. Not a very significant change, but you will see that it will go up based on the type of redundancy that was selected. With site recovery, you pay for the protected
Adriana,
Yes,
can I interrupt for a second? Can you go
sure,
back to
go
the other
ahead.
slide? Okay, so when I go on the Azure
Mhm.
calculator to do the calculation, there's also this on-premise server as an option. What is the
Right.
difference between this on-premise server and Azure VM?
Okay, so for the difference there is that if you're going to be protecting a machine that is on premises, so say for example, your customer has a physical store and they have two virtual machines in there, or they have two physical machines in there and they want to protect those, right? They want to do backups for those. You have the option of having that backup that is done for the physical machines or the virtual machines that are in a physical location or on premises to be sent to Azure for storage and for protection. So that's the location that they'd have the backup. So instead of doing the backup locally, and then you have the disk or tapes that they back them up on that are still sitting on premises, you have that backup in the cloud versus the Azure VM. So if you have virtual machines that are in Azure, you can also back up those. So Azure VM backups are different from the physical machines or servers that you'd have on premises that you can then send that backup to Azure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So with the protected instances, you pay for protected instances in site recovery, and these will vary based on the type of instances that are being replicated. So you pay based on the number of protected instances. So if you have servers, if you have SQL servers, or in the cloud you have managed databases or so on, you are paying for one, the protected instances um, that are being replicated. You can use the hybrid benefit for your machines that are coming from on-premises. So we know that we are replicating the VMs from on-premises and they're licensed. All virtual machines running in the cloud have to be properly licensed. So instead of when you've done a failover and you're now provisioning the VMs in the cloud, instead of paying the licensing costs on top of the compute costs for however long you're going to have your secondary site running, you can use the hybrid benefit and bring your eligible license from the VMs that you have on premises to use in Azure. So you don't have any licensing costs, just the compute costs. The additional resources that you'll be paying for in a site recovery instance is the storage usage. You'll pay for bandwidth, so outbound data transfers, And as we mentioned, you're only charged for the VM and compute usage in the event that you have failed over and you're using those resources. And as soon as you fail back, you are not charged for those. So we're going to have a small demo for this just to show a typical backup and then a restore for an Azure virtual machine. So this is pre-recorded because it actually takes a bit of time in real life. So you can see here that the first thing we're going to do is create a recovery services vault. And this is where all of the data for your backups or your Azure Site Recovery is stored. So you create a vault in a particular resource group, keep the resource groups together so that you're able to, be able to categorize and easily find your resources. You can use tagging for, just being able to have proper billing constructs, be able to manage your billing properly, be able to find resources, and you can also use these for policies and so on. So we're going to skip through. We have gone to the Create tab. You include your tags, you review, and you create. On the Completed tab, you are able to go to the resource there. So we're here now in the vault, and you can see we have different headings that we can be able to check the status of our vault and our backups. We can see the types of backups. We have site recovery and what we can replicate with site recovery. And then you are able to go to we can see that we have backup policies that we mentioned before, the integration with policies. You have monitoring for alerting, logs, and you can view your backup jobs. You can view your site recovery jobs, and you're able to get the information on the status of those as well. You can choose where you want your workloads where the workloads are running for your backup. So to begin initiating a backup, you choose where the location of the target for backup is. So as you can see here, you can either backup from Azure Stack Hub or Azure Stack HCI, or you can go from on-premises. Then you can check what you want to backup. So if you have virtual machines, because it's in Azure, you'll see these options: virtual machines, file shares, SQL servers, and SAP HANA. Here we're taken to the policies, and here you determine what the policies that you want to choose for your particular backup. So you see the amount of backups you want to do, the operational tiers, you see the vault tier. You're also able to see the resiliency. And when we come down here, you can see the retention point. So you're able to see how long you're retaining your data for. The instant restores. So this is for the snapshots that are taken, how long you retain your instant restores, your snapshots, and the backup frequency. So how much you want your backup to be done. You can either go with the default policy that Azure has, or you can create a new policy here. So here's where we are, the create a policy. You're able to name your policies, give it the frequency that you desire. How long do you want to retain your snapshots, and retention for your particular backup job based on organizational needs and what the organizational needs, let's say. So we go and we'll use the default policy from Azure, and this is the details on that. You then add virtual machines. Because we selected virtual machines initially, you go and you add the virtual machines that you want to have backed up. You have the option to choose only the OS disk, so you can only back up the OS disk, or you can back up everything, including OS disk and the data disks that are attached to the VMs. So we enable the backup. And when the backup is being processed, you can go to the vault or you can go to the backup center to see the information on the backups. So here we see that there was a count of 2 virtual machines that were backed up. And because there was a schedule for it, you'll see the initial backup pending because there is no backup that was performed on this VM as yet. So you're able to see the recovery points that you have, if they're crash consistent, app consistent, and file consistent. So for this demo, I did it's an on-demand backup. So it backed up before the schedule. You're able to choose a different backup or retention period for this because it's not a part of the policy that was mentioned before. So I select retention period. And then it triggers the backup. Now this takes a little while, but we'll go into the notification for that, or we can go back to backup jobs. And you'll see here that when you view details, you can see the status of the backup. So you have the snapshot being taken. The snapshot is taken first, and then the snapshot is transferred to the vault. So when that's completed, then it will transfer that snapshot to the vault. And there's where it will be stored for the set retention period until it is deleted. We paused there and we came back after a few backups and restores had been done, but let's just zero in on a restore. So we see here that you have different backups. So here's where we configured the backup, or we protected the servers in the beginning. You see the completion of the on-demand backup that was done in the previous video, and then you can see that there were multiple scheduled backups. So it ran until the scheduled time from the policy, and it did 2 scheduled backups for both of the VMs. So you can see VM1 and VM2. Also, you can see that there was a restore done, but let's just do a restore to show how that's done. So we go to Backup Center, and as you said, you can see all of the backups and the information about the different jobs that had been done during the time. So you're able to see over the last 24 hours the amount of backup instances, which is 2, as we had 2 VMs that we did a backup for. And then you can see security alerts based on if there was anything that went wrong with the backups, if there was something that failed, if something didn't work, you'll be able to see all of those there. So let's go to the restore. You're able to click restore from there. So you restore the workload that you would want. For our case, it's a virtual machine. And then we select the particular backup instance. When you select the instance, you will see the different snapshots that were created based on the different times that a backup was run. And you will see you can be able to check the different dates to find the most recent or whichever backup that is desired. So you can create a new virtual machine or you can just restore the disks. For this session, we're going to just create a new virtual machine and just replicate everything there. So you create the virtual machine, you put in the name and all of the required information. So put it in a separate resource group than where the original virtual machines were. And then you get a staging location. A staging location is basically just an in-between place for the virtual machines or the workloads while they're being transferred from the vault to that new account. So the video was paused as that actually took a bit of time. The video was paused and it came back. And let's just jump back here where the details of the restore were put in the activity log. And then you see the status of the backup, the restore, sorry. You can show the resource group that it's in, and you go to the resource group just to check now if it was backed up properly. And when you go into the resource group, you will then see VM4 restore. That's the name of the VM that we just had. So you see the restore was done for this virtual machine. You see the disks that are associated with the virtual machine. Let's just take a look. So VM4 restore was the name of the virtual machine. You see the disks and the NIC for the virtual machine, and you can see that it has been fully restored. So now that we've just seen a bit of how simple it can be to enable backup for our organizations, let's just look at a few ways that we can identify opportunities for providing solutions like this. So if you have customers with on-premises servers, data applications, and they don't have an existing backup, Azure Backup is your guy. If you need business continuity, you're running critical applications or workloads, you have a low retention recovery time objective and a high recovery point objective, which means you can't lose a lot of data, little to no data. You need backup and you need disaster recovery. If customers are having hardware refreshes, you can utilize the either the backup or you can utilize the Azure Site Recovery. And the fun thing about this is that the site recovery is actually the tool that is used in migrations. So if you need to migrate your on-premises servers or computers to the cloud, this is actually the tool you use. So it now doubles as a migration tool, and this is how you can assist with hardware refreshes instead of getting more on-premises equipment and staying on premises. You can now do your hardware refreshes and actually move customers to the cloud. If you have backup on premises and you don't have any offsite backup, you need a cloud backup. You need a secondary strategy. That's another opportunity there. If your customers cannot afford a full secondary site for disaster recovery, Azure Site Recovery is probably a very good solution for them. You have no on-premises backups at all, you need a backup solution. And if they need cost-effective backup or disaster recovery solutions, then Azure is the way to go. So let's talk. At the end of our session, we will have some one-on-ones with everyone who has come out, and we're just going to figure out if how we can now move forward, how we can now provide value, how we can be able to leverage the cloud to be able to ensure that our customers' data, their infrastructure, their apps, everything is protected. Any questions? No questions today?
Hold on a second, Adrian. I'm seeing a question in the chat. Omar, he's asking, what's the ballpark monthly commitment on a customer with a 2 terabyte on an on-prem server?
All right. Well, that would be dependent on what they have running on the server, if they have any applications or so, and the storage costs. We'd have to go to the calculator and you and I kind of flesh out the dependencies and see what the pricing would be, because each is different. There's not really a ballpark, as it would also depend on what the size of the VM is, the type of VM being protected, and so on. So we'll
Let's
I'll have a
let's
discussion
touch
with you.
base with Omar. All right, Omar. So we're gonna share Adriana's contact. I also have your contact, so we'll just have a follow-up email, and then you can have a one-on-one with Adriana afterwards. Okay? Alrighty. So thank you everyone again for joining us. We do appreciate the interaction that you guys had with the little activity. We're hoping that it shed a light in terms of some of the facilities that Microsoft Azure can offer you and your customers. As Adrian has stated, if you want to have any one-on-one just with your team to go over this material or to do like a sales presentation, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you guys again and have a wonderful rest of the day. Oh, and also thank you, Adriana. You know you're always thankful. All right.
Not a problem. It was a pleasure today with you all, and I hope to see you in the next 2 weeks for security follow-up. So all do have a good day, and I look forward to conversing with each and everyone.
All righty. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.